Parents kicked me out on the day of my final exams after their daughter announces her pregnancy, but now, a year later, they're both reaching out to me to mend things. I, 19F, got kicked out of my house by my parents about a year ago, just a few weeks after I turned 18. That's not even the worst part. It happened to be right around the time of finals week in high school and I pretty much had nowhere to go. I got really lucky that I have good friends, though, because my best friend and her parents allowed me to stay with them and I couldn't be more grateful to them. The reason my parents kicked me out was because my older sister got pregnant and they decided that it was time for her to move back in with them so she would be well taken care of. She isn't even actually my full biological sister, she's my half-sister. My mother had been dating Jacob, my stepfather, when they were in college and she got pregnant a couple of months before they graduated. But she was way too young at the time, so she decided to give birth to the baby, but she didn't want to get married to him since it was just meant to be a fling and they broke up, but Jacob still wanted to be a father. So they decided to co-parent Sasha, my half-sister, and they stayed in touch. When Sasha was 3 years old, my mom met my biological father, they dated for 2 years and got married. 1 year into their marriage, she got pregnant with me and yet again, she wanted to keep the baby, but my father was not ready. He wanted to terminate the pregnancy, but my mother couldn't bring herself to agree with it, so they ended up parting ways over this. After my dad walked out on my pregnant mother, she decided to cut all ties with him and his family and reconcile with Jacob again. So when I was born, my dad was already out of the picture and I was raised by my mom and my stepdad. We got married a couple of years after her divorce from my father was finalized. But even then, I have never been able to accept him as my family because he has never treated me like that. I guess the only reason he decided to reconcile with my mother while she was pregnant with me was because he wanted to get on her good side and I guess he was still in love with her. But I was always a burden to him, and he had always been cold to me, ever since I was little. And even Sasha behaved the same way with me. So while I got along well enough with my mom, I never was able to bring myself to like those two, even though we have spent our entire lives as a family. That's never made a difference to them, though, they always treated me like an outsider, and even though my mother has always claimed that she loves me just as much as she loves them, it's never felt that way because she has never acknowledged how distant they are from me, and when I was younger, I actually even tried to bond with them, but was always rejected by them. So after I was old enough to realize what was going on, I gave up on having a relationship with Jacob and Sasha and that's how it's been. I shouldn't have been surprised when they decided to kick me out of the house because Sasha was pregnant and she wanted to move back in with us, but it came as a shock to me. I should have known that for Jacob, Sasha was always going to be more of a priority, no matter how much older she was than me. But I guess I had just expected my mother to take a stand for me, which she didn't. About a year ago, just 2 days before finals week was about to begin, Sasha came over and told us that she was pregnant. She is 6 years older than me, so she was literally 24 years old at the time, and in spite of that, my parents decided to kick me out to accommodate her so she could save money. Sasha and her boyfriend, who had been with her since high school, had been living together in a tiny little apartment a little distance away from our house. I thought that it would be reasonable enough to expect her to continue staying there, but she wanted to move back home because she did not feel comfortable staying in that apartment all by herself. She works from home and her boyfriend has to go out for work every day and occasionally, his job requires him to travel. So she thought that for as long as she was pregnant, it would be easier for her to just move back in with her parents, and that way, she wouldn't have to be alone at any point. She would be able to save a lot of money on rent since even her boyfriend was going to move in with her, and so, she and my parents decided that she was going to move back in. It would have still been fine with me, but they decided to tell me that I had to move out for a couple of months since they needed a room for her. Sasha already had a room in our house, but after she had moved out for college, Jacob had turned it into an office and my parents told me that she couldn't stay in the living room. The only viable option was for me to give up my room and they told me to think of it as a sacrifice for my family. I might not have been so upset about that had it not been a conversation that they had with me right before my first exam. I was already pretty stressed out because I had to prepare for a test and I had a bunch of exams coming up in the next 2 weeks, but all they cared about was Sasha and her pregnancy. So I put my foot down and told them that I was not going anywhere because Sasha had never been my family. She had never treated me like family, so I didn't need to make any sacrifices. My parents tried to reason with me, but I thought that they were being crazy and I continued to argue with them until they finally snapped. Jacob told me that I had to leave by the end of the week or else I would be kicked out and nobody could stop him since I was an adult and he was free to choose whether he wanted to let me live in his house or not. I thought that my mother would defend me, but she told me that Jacob was right and they needed to make space for their real grandkids, so they didn't have the time or energy to fight with me on this and I just had to do as I was told. The fact that my mom used the phrase real grandkids just confirmed what I had already believed and known for years, that my mom, Sasha, and Jacob were a little family of their own, and I had always been an outsider and would always be treated like one. I was very upset, so I decided to start packing my bags instantly, without even caring about the fact that I had an exam the next day. They did not even try to stop me as I was leaving, so I knew exactly where their priorities were, and I ended up at my best friend's doorstep. When I explained everything to her and her parents, they told me that I was welcome to live with them and I could live with them for as long as I wanted to. A lot of you might be wondering why I did not approach any family members, but let me just clarify, I don't really have any family that I know. Jacob's family is just like him, they don't like me at all, and I knew it would have been pointless to approach them because helping me out would be the last thing that they did. And as for my mom's side of the family, I haven't ever known them. Apparently, her parents and the rest of our family had cut her off when she first got pregnant with Sasha because they wanted her to focus on getting her degree and didn't want her to go through with the pregnancy because she was just too young. But she went through with it anyway, and since then, nobody from her family has ever spoken to her. They were not even there at her wedding to my father, nor were they there when Sasha, or even I, was born. At least that's what she told me, so I didn't think that I had any family that was going to be able to help me out, so I had to approach my friends instead. After I got kicked out and started staying with my best friend and her family, I constantly expected my mother to reach out to me. I did not have any such expectations from Jacob or Sasha because I knew that they never cared about me and they were probably happy that I had left since I never fit in with their perfect little family. But the fact that not even my mother decided to reach out to me after I had left is what really hurt me, and after a couple of months, I decided to give up hope altogether. A full year has passed since then, and I have heard from a couple of my friends that Sasha has given birth a few months ago, and she and her boyfriend have been posting about how they are proud parents to their daughter. The three of them are still living with my parents, presumably because they want to save money on rent. I couldn't care less about it, to be honest. I've only been focused on improving my own life because after I graduated high school, I had to think about ways to get to college because now that I had no contact with my parents anymore, I didn't have any money either. My best friend's parents had been kind enough to allow me to live with them in their house rent-free, but I couldn't possibly expect them to pay for me to go to college as well, given that they had 2 kids of their own. I had been really worried about that, but thankfully, I had applied for a couple of scholarship programs as well, and since I'm a pretty good student, I got a scholarship from one of the colleges that I had applied to, and I decided to go there. Granted, it was not my first choice or even my second, but I was not in a position to decline any opportunity to save money. Because of the scholarship, 60% of my tuition had been waived off, and I decided to take out a student loan with the help of my best friend's parents, with them as the cosigner on the loan. But I reassured them that they wouldn't have to worry about paying it all back because I would be working as well as studying, so I'll try to pay it all back on my own, and that's what I have been doing. It's been tough, but at the end of the day, I know that I'm gonna make it on my own, and it's pretty rewarding as well. I hadn't had any contact with my family for the past year, and I hadn't been expecting them to reach out to me either, but surprisingly, my mother sent me an email about a week ago, saying that she wanted me to come back home for the weekend this time because she really missed me, and so did Jacob and Sasha. And they knew that they had treated me unfairly, so they wanted an opportunity to mend things with me. In the email, my mother was being extra sweet with me, and she was really laying it on thick, so it reeked of fakeness. Call it a gut feeling or just instinct, but I was instantly able to figure out that there was definitely something fishy going on, and I did not respond to that email. She sent me another email a couple of days after that, but I did not respond to that one as well, even though I was tempted to, because I really wanted to find out what was going on. I knew for a fact that there was definitely a reason behind their behavior, since it was very unlikely that they had suddenly come to their senses 1 year after the incident and were feeling guilty all of a sudden. It was possible, but I've known them my entire life and I know how they are as people, so it was unlikely. However, I got the explanation that I needed 2 days ago when my maternal grandparents decided to reach out to me. I was surprised that they had even found a way to contact me because I'm pretty sure that my parents did not give out my contact info to them, but they told me that they had to ask around a lot, and eventually, one of my friends from high school decided to trust them and give them my phone number. It actually turned out to be my best friend, and I'm so glad that she didn't tell me anything about it because it was a really pleasant surprise. Anyway, when they called me, it was difficult for me to even believe that it was really them because, like I had said, I've never known them. I've never seen them, I've never heard their voices, and I was quite skeptical of it in the beginning. But then they FaceTimed me and showed me a bunch of photo albums with my mother in them, photos of her childhood and her teenage years, and I finally believed them, that they were really my grandparents. They got pretty emotional when they saw me, and so did I. I don't know why, but I just did. Anyway, we got to talking, and I started telling them about myself and my life. I tried to stay away from the topic of my parents as much as I could, but there was no point because they already knew everything. They told me that a huge part of the reason that they hadn't contacted me so far was because of my parents, and recently, they had found out the truth, which is why they had decided to contact me. I was really confused about what that meant because, as far as I knew, my grandparents had cut my mother out of their lives and had never stayed in touch with her after she got pregnant the first time around. And that was all I knew because that's what my mother had told me, but apparently, there was more to the story. So the reason that they hadn't been on speaking terms for so many years was not because they were opposed to the idea of my mother giving birth to Sasha at such a young age, but because they were opposed to her relationship with Jacob. And my mother had been telling me a bunch of lies about her own parents because she wanted to preserve Jacob's pristine image. My grandparents had been quite supportive of the pregnancy and had told her that it was her choice whether she wanted to have the baby or not, but they were not fine with her relationship with Jacob because, at the time, he used to be quite a well-known addict. They had grown up in the same neighborhood, went to the same high school, and ended up in the same college as well, so my grandparents were well aware of what Jacob had been up to since high school and did not approve of his relationship with my mom. So they had given her an ultimatum that they were ready to support her throughout the pregnancy and even after it, because she would obviously need the financial support from them, but their only condition was that she would have to break up with Jacob because they did not want her to be influenced by him. After giving it a lot of thought, my mother decided to break up with Jacob because no matter how hard he tried, he was just unable to clean up his act. I think it was in her best interests, but I guess she started resenting them. They managed to get full custody of Sasha when she was born, and Jacob would only get supervised visiting rights for the first couple of years. Gradually though, he was able to finish his degree and get clean, but my grandparents still did not fully trust him, and they were right because he would relapse every couple of months and he was still not good for either my mom or Sasha. So they set my mother up with my father, who happened to be the son of a family friend, and after seeing each other on and off for a couple of years, my mom got married to him because she had given up hope that Jacob would ever get better. But I don't think she was ever truly able to move on from him, because 1 year into her marriage, she went back to Jacob and they started an affair. Then she got pregnant for a second time and had to come clean to my father about the affair because she just couldn't imagine a life without Jacob, and now that she was pregnant, she would have to tell him the truth. And coming to that, her infidelity was actually the reason she ended up getting a divorce from my father and eventually marrying Jacob. So whatever she had told me about my father being opposed to the idea of having me at all was a big fat lie. After I was born, they had several paternity tests conducted, and thankfully, I didn't have anything to do with Jacob, and I was in fact my biological father's child, which is great because I wouldn't want to be Jacob's biological daughter anyway. In fact, my dad even had partial custody of me for a while, but I barely remember it since it was so long ago. Unfortunately, my biological father passed away in a car crash when I was 7 months old, and that made it all the more convenient for my mother to lie to me for the rest of my life. My father's side of the family did not want anything to do with me after he passed away, so it was pretty great for my mom. As for my grandparents, they were very upset when they found out that my mother had been having an affair with Jacob, and once again, they had given her an ultimatum, telling her that she could either cut him out of her permanently and try to work on her marriage with my father, or she could get this divorce and never speak to them again. This time, my mother chose to be with Jacob since by then, he had been clean for almost a year, and that was longer than any of his previous stints. That was the last massive fallout that my mother had with her parents. She was still pregnant with me. After that, they did not speak to each other until I was born, when my grandparents softened up and decided to reach out to her so they could see me. But at the time, Jacob was not ready to play along and be a happy family with my grandparents because of the way that they had been treating him previously, so my mother also rejected their attempts to reconcile. My grandparents did not give up though, they continued to try and talk to my mother every few months, but she never accepted them back into her life. This went on for a couple of years when Jacob and my mom hit a rough patch financially and couldn't afford rent. With nobody else to rely on, my mom had to reach out to her parents, and my grandparents decided to buy her a house so she wouldn't have to worry about rent ever again. My grandparents thought that this grand gesture would get her to speak to them again, and maybe they would even be one happy family, but that didn't happen. This was almost 6 years ago, when my family and I moved into our new house, and it was a huge upgrade from the apartment that we used to live in. I had always wondered how my parents had been able to afford a house like this because it looked pretty expensive and it was also located in a pretty nice neighborhood. My mom is a receptionist and Jacob worked in sales, but like I said, his company had been going through a rough patch and it was quite unlikely that they had been able to afford a house like that since it was quite out of their budget. But now I know how they were able to afford it. It was all thanks to my grandparents. My parents, being the thankless people that they are, still did not try to rebuild their relationship with my grandparents. Both my mother and Jacob knew that my grandparents had paid for the house, but my mother told my grandparents that they were still not ready to reconnect with them and they needed some time and space to think about it because they had not been on speaking terms for a really long time, and emotionally, it was quite difficult for them to deal with so much at once. My grandparents were quite naive, and they decided to give them their space for a couple of months, but when my mother did not reach out to them after that, they decided to try and talk to her again, but she just told them that she needed more space. This went on for the next few years and eventually, my grandparents just accepted that maybe this was just not meant to be. They were also getting older and they told me that it was humiliating for them to try and contact their daughter again and again, only to be rejected every single time. So they just told my mother that they understood that she did not want anything to do with them anymore and it was their own fault for not being very kind to her in the past. The only thing that they asked of her was that they keep sending photos of our family, just so that they would know that we were doing well, and that would be all they needed to keep going. My mother surprisingly agreed to that, and that's how my grandparents had been dealing with the situation for the past couple of years, which was really sad, and I ended up crying when they told me all of this. All my life, I had thought of them to be the villains, but that was really not the case. Anyway, coming to how they found out the truth, my grandpa recently had a health scare and had a few heart issues to deal with. When that happened, he and my grandma decided that they could no longer pretend that everything was fine and that since they were not getting any younger, it would be necessary to fight against the circumstances so that at least before they passed away, they'd be able to have the satisfaction of knowing that they tried their best to reconcile with their family. So a couple of weeks ago, they just randomly decided to drop in at my mom's house, which is technically their house since they paid for it and it's their name on the deed. And when they visited, my mother had no other option but to let them in and entertain them. They found out that they were great-grandparents now since Sasha had had her kids. But when they asked about me, my parents got really awkward and didn't know what to say. So they told them that I was away at college and it was probably not a good day to contact me right now because I was in a really fragile state due to exams and stuff. They were not even able to come up with a fake college name for my grandparents, and that's when they started to think that something fishy was going on. They had a gut feeling that my parents had screwed up in some way and decided to speak to our neighbors after they left the house, and that's how they found out that I hadn't been living with my parents for the past year after I had been kicked out for some reason. My neighbors didn't know the exact reason, but they had a son who went to school with me and he told my grandparents that I had been staying with my best friend for a while, so they might know something. And that's how my grandparents contacted my best friend and eventually got to know what had happened with me. When they found out the truth, they were naturally furious, and now, they had told my mom that she needed to vacate the house with her family because they needed to make space for the only real grandkid that they had. And I've got to say, it was retribution at its finest because those were the exact words that my parents had said to me, and my best friend made sure that my grandparents knew exactly which nerve to hit. All of a sudden, it made sense why my parents were trying to reach out to me and make amends because they were about to lose their home. The only reason my grandparents had waited for a couple of days to contact me even after they found out everything was that they were afraid of how I would react, but eventually, they just decided to go for it because they had wasted a lot of years anyway, out of fear of how my mother would react. And now, they wanted to do the right thing. However, my grandparents also wanted me to have an opportunity to decide what I wanted, so they told me that if I wanted to give my family a chance then they would still allow them to live in that house, and if I wanted them out, then that's what would be done. Apparently, even when they had visited, nobody in the family seemed happy to be seeing them. And I was the only person who genuinely seemed interested in having a relationship with them. My grandparents did not want to be played for fools anymore, so I had to decide whether I wanted my parents to have a home or not. And if I'm being honest, I think I want them kicked out, but that would be a little too vindictive, and so, I want to know if that would be the right thing to do or not. So Wibta, if I told my grandparents that I wanted to kick my family out? Update 1. Hi, first and foremost, thank you so much for all the comments and all the support that has been pouring in ever since I made that post. It really means the world to me and you guys can't imagine how much I appreciate it. Coming to my decision, I have decided that I want my family out of that house. I communicated that with my grandparents a couple of days back and right now, they're in the process of evicting my family. Of course, there's a lot of legal stuff that I don't need to bother myself with, according to my grandparents. And there's also a lot of emotional manipulation that my parents and mostly Sasha have been trying to do, but my grandparents are immune to it because after speaking to me, they found out exactly what my mother had been saying about them and what she had been teaching their grandkids about them. So they don't have any sympathy to spare for them, and to be honest, Sasha and her boyfriend are working individuals. I'm sure they can arrange something for themselves like loads of other people in the world do. And the same goes for my parents, so I don't think I need to feel bad about anything. After all, it's not like they had felt bad for me when they kicked me out, knowing that I was just 18 and I was still in school at the time. Regardless of that, I was still able to do well academically, even though it had happened right before my exams. As for my college tuition, I told my grandparents that they didn't have to worry about it, but they told me that they would be taking care of whatever student loan I had taken out and apologized to me for not being there for me earlier. We have a lot to talk about and we have a lot to make up on, but right now, things are going pretty well. Update 2. Hi, so a couple of weeks ago, my grandparents initiated the process of evicting my family, and they have until the end of next month to leave. My mother is not happy about it and she felt like it was her duty to let me know. She had emailed me a couple of weeks back, trying to get back on my good side and mend things with me, probably just so that her parents wouldn't kick her out of the house. The email that she recently sent me was very different from the one that I received earlier, since this one is just full of curse words directed at me, and basically just wishing that she had never given birth to me. She even said that she wished I had been in that car crash with my father and both of us had been taken out in one go. So, yeah, that's my mom for you guys. But anyway, it doesn't matter to me because she's not my family. She's nobody to me if I'm being honest. The only family that I have as of now are my grandparents, my best friend and her parents, and a couple of relatives whom my grandparents are introducing to me since my mother had cut them off a really long time ago because she wanted nothing to do with her family. It's kind of all in a very weird place right now, but I know that I'll get used to it eventually. Update 3. Hi, so the holidays have just started and this time, I have come back home to my old house. It feels weird to be back here since my family moved out a really long time ago. I don't know what they have been up to, and neither am I interested in it. But my grandparents have been staying here since they left and they have done up the place quite nicely, and even my room feels like home once again. We are even hosting Thanksgiving dinner for a couple of family members and my best friend and her parents in a few days, and I feel like my life is getting back on track again. I'm really happy and I just wish that I could feel like this forever.